Right, so I'm going to share my screen and then jump into my empty room and we can start looking at these different functions. I will say that if you've got any questions or anything, please feel free to drop it into the chat pod. I can still see that um, cropping up even when I'm in another screen sharing things, so feel free to put your questions in there and I'll get to those um, promptly. Alright, so I'm going to share and I'm going to jump into this empty layout that I've got prepared in advance. Okay, so the first function we're going to look at this morning is using the question and answer pod, the Q&A pod. And you would add that into your room, the same as we do with all other pods, by going up to the pods area and selecting Q&A from the list. And I'm going to make this bigger so that we can all see what's going on. And this is what the Q&A pod looks like as a host to begin with. I'm going to clear everything that's in there so it's blank. Alright, so the purpose of the Q&A pod is to take pressure off the chat pod in terms of, let's say that there's going to be important content going into the chat pod from participants from time to time, and there's probably going to be a lot of traffic, particularly if you've got large classes. That is not that important. In fact, a lot of the time it's students talking to each other rather than to what's going on with you. The Q&A pod's a strategy to alleviate that, where you can basically instruct people to say, if you've got questions for me that need addressing, pop them into the Q&A pod and I will be able to either respond to them in the session or afterwards, because it gives you a full log of all those questions. You can respond to them in your I2 sites via your discussion boards or get back to people individually if it's private, whatever. You can do that. So it's a way of separating the amount of large volumes of text going into the chat pod into important stuff for you. For students, there's a little icon up the top here that allows you to see the student view, participant view, and the host view. And for the student view, it's just literally an empty box with like a chat pod with a field underneath where they can type in their questions. So sample, for example, where will I find X, right? And that goes in to the Q&A pod. The student sees only their questions. Morning, Shani. So we're just looking at the question and answer pod at the moment, the Q&A pod, and I've put in a question as a student because I'm looking at the student view up here. I can only see the questions that I've put in or that the host for the room has responded to, and I'll show you what that looks like. So we've got a student that's put a question in. For the host view, I've got a list of all the questions in here. Here's a question that's come in from this student. In this case, it's me. I can select that question and then underneath put in my response. Good question, you find it here, blah, blah, blah. So there's my response that's going to go back to the student. And over on the right hand side, you'll actually see that there's two options. One of them is to reply just to that student, so they'll get a private response to their question. And the other one is to respond to everybody. So if I click that respond to everybody and then jump back to my student view if I want to have a look, I can see the initial question and the response from the teacher. I know it's a bit confusing because it's showing Lachlan Kalish, who's the student, and Lachlan Kalish, who's the presenter, but that's the idea. There'll be a list of questions and responses as long as you've put in a reply that go in there. If you're lucky enough to have a facilitator in the room that might be handling those questions while one person presents and the other one moderates, you're actually able to use this assign to function to delegate who's going to be answering different questions. I've only seen this used by student services, for example, when they've got several hundred students in an orientation and there are particular helpers in the room that answer particular types of questions. So that's where you might delegate and assign and use that function. Most of the time it's just going to be you. So you'll click on the question the students put in and reply, and then choose, is it going just back to them or to everybody? In terms of the pod options, It allows you to export a full log of all questions that you've got to yourself as an email after the fact. So if you get to the end of your session, got a bunch of questions from students and you haven't been able to deal with them in your 45 minutes, hour, whatever, you can email that log straight to yourself. You get a confirmation, it's going to that address, and then that log gets sent to your email address. So it's quite a structured way of collecting just the questions that you want from students, whilst they can still use the chat pod themselves for their own purposes. All right. Is that kosher for everybody? Does it make sense? You can just use the status bar to indicate that it's all okay, or drop something into the chat pod, and then I'll move on to the next area. Sweet, thank you. All right, so I will move the Q&A pod over into the corner and we'll get on to the next section. So polls, using polls. Polls are pretty popular in Adobe Connect, probably for a couple of reasons. One of them is that they're very easy to create. You can have as many as you like. Going at once, you can load them in advance so they're waiting for people when they join the meeting room, like your participants poll that was waiting for you this morning. You can create them in advance and hide them and then bring them back in after the fact. But we start by going to the poll option and adding a new poll. And I'll make that a little bit smaller. There are 3 types of polls that you can create. In terms of the question types, you can use multiple choice. So you'd put in the question, then you put in an answer on each line that people can choose from. There's some answers, and then you open the poll. At that point, it displays to the students like this. You can click on this View Votes button and that'll show you who's put in what responses as well. So I'll go back to the poll and put in some answers. So this person answered 3, and then I get a little summary over on the right hand side, visual and numeric, that basically tells me what's going on. You need to make sure this box broadcast results is checked, and that way everyone in the room can see this view. If that's part of the exercise, you want it to be able to talk about what people are putting into the poll findings, make sure that broadcast results is checked. If it's kind of private information and you just want to collect it without them seeing it, then uncheck it. People's choices in the poll are anonymous, so no one else can tell who's putting what in the room. We just get this kind of number. But you can click on View Votes as a host and it'll tell you who chose what response. So there is a way to basically see who's doing what in the room. Now, at this point, let's say that my question needed adjustment. I could choose to edit, and then the question could be amended or other answers could be put in, and then I can reopen the poll. Or I could choose to edit to end the poll, which basically then gives me a message it's closed, and if we want to start it again, you need to click reopen. So you can reuse your polls. If, for example, people have put in responses during the poll and you wanted to, I'll just start that again. So Lachlan's gone in, he's had a go at the poll, the summary of his responses appeared here, and I actually want to reset this poll and use it again, clearing people's responses. You can go up to the poll menu and clear all the responses. So it's still live, it's just reset. So maybe that is part of the activity that you might be using this for, where you start by getting people's first impressions or initial kind of answers to something, and then afterwards you can clear those and give them another crack at it. So maybe their position has changed over time, and that would just be using the same poll. Make sure when you create the poll that the title is something distinctive, so that if you need to find that poll and reuse it later, you can find it. So this one we'll call distinctively titled poll, and I'm going to close that poll, hide, and then I've come back the following week and I want to use the same poll again. I go up to my pods menu, down to poll, and I can look through my list of items that I've added. You might not have as many as I do, but you'll find your distinctive title there, and the same poll can be reused. So hide doesn't kill it entirely. It just, well, as the title says, it hides it. So we'll just have a look at the other question types for polls. That was multiple choice. I'm going to end this one, and this time I'm going to change the type of poll I'm using to multiple answers. And multiple answers simply means that now I can choose a number of different responses. So that's neither kind of a correct nor incorrect type response, but you might have choices in there where you want people to have the opportunity to select a number of different options. So that's multiple answers. So that's the difference between those two. I can edit again, and I'll change the format of this one to short answer. This is possibly one of the more popular formats for polls. Short answer, it basically gives a small text box underneath, and the students can put in anything. So how do you feel about, who knows, global warming? There you go. So that goes in there. We open the poll, and this is what it looks like for the students. Question, I put in my answer. To be honest, I'm confused about whatever. And then, because we've got broadcast results checked, those answers are being collected, the text responses are being collected underneath, and people can see them. That, I think, has about a 250 to 200 word limit, maybe. Might be characters. I'll have to get back to you on that limit, but it's decent. It's not just one sentence. If you want to type, if you want them providing a decent amount, it can go in there using that format of poll, so short answer. And it gives, obviously, an opportunity for more discussion based on those responses. Again, who wrote which answers is not displayed to the other students, but you as the host can click on View Votes and see who wrote what. There isn't an export function. I will say there's no export function for the responses in a poll. So quite often we get asked, how do I get that information? You've got a few options. You can take a screenshot using a snip tool, for example, if you wanted to grab all that information. You can try highlighting and copying and pasting, but you'll have mixed results, I promise you. But it doesn't have an export function at the moment. So if you're putting an activity together with that in mind, that you're going to be able to capture all those results, it's going to be as a snapshot, for example, rather than just text sent back to your email address. Okay, so that's polls. Does anyone have any questions about the polls before I move on to the next area? Just drop something into the chat pod for me and let me know. Sweet. Okay, thanks Brett, thanks Nicholas. Where do I start the poll? Okay, well, I create the poll by going up to pods, Shani, and going down to poll and adding a new poll. Yep, and you create it and then you open the poll, which is in the top right hand corner. That's it. My pleasure. So I'll just minimize that and we'll get on to the next one. Breakout rooms. Okay. Look, breakout rooms is something that all I can say is I'm going to show you the basics of how to activate them and start them. But if you want to get good at using them, it's really going to take a decent amount of practice to get I guess a finessed result, because they take some preparing, and that also means planning for the activity, etc. But I'm going to show you how they behave so that you can have that opportunity to play around with them yourself. The long and short of it is you're creating a number of rooms that you specify how many. The students will be allocated into groups into those rooms, and that can be done automatically or manually. And they'll have some type of task or activity that they need to do in their groups. You want to be able to moderate that, and then essentially the breakout rooms will finish and you come back together as a group for some purpose. That's one possible scenario. So I'm going to handle this a couple of ways. I'm going to show you how to create them as a host so you see what that looks like. And then I'll actually start a breakout session in our room with you guys so you can see what it's like as a student. So the point is the breakout rooms really start from the attendees pod in the room. So I'm going to add one in here just so you can see what's going on there. So our attendees pod that sits in there, you're used to this first view which shows who are the hosts, who are the participants. If you look at these icons underneath the title, attendee view, the second one is the breakout room view. And you need to basically work from there as your starting point. If I click on that, you'll see basically a number of breakout rooms. I think by default, if you've never used it before, there might be 3. So I'm going to delete a couple of these others so that we're in the same spot. So there's 3 potential breakout rooms. We haven't started them yet. I'm just viewing, I guess, the breakout room organization area. There's a button here that says Start Breakouts, which will launch the rooms. Over on the right here, there's 2 buttons. One allows me to create additional rooms. You saw me delete some a second ago using the crosses. You can add more using that. And then this one with the crossover arrows, which will actually automatically put everyone that's in the room into a breakout room. It evenly distributes the numbers for you, so you don't have to worry about putting people into specific rooms yourself unless you want to do that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to join the room on my phone for a second as a student so that we get an idea of what it looks like. Feel free to drop things into the chat as we go here. I just have to multitask for a second. Okay. So here's me. I've just joined the room. I've got 2 people here that need to be organised. This main area means they haven't been allocated to a breakout room yet. And you can see that when I hover my mouse over the top of different people's names, it's giving me some options. So I can actually put that person into a breakout room manually. It now says that this person, Lachlan on the phone, is in breakout room 1 when the breakouts start. So they haven't started yet. We've still got this option that says start breakouts, but this is just me organising, delegating, etc. Alternatively, I can just drag him back to the rest into the main room, and now they're both underneath this main kind of area. If I hit evenly distribute, it will basically put each of the people in there into the rooms. I'll just make sure that I'm a student. I am a student. Okay, good. Right, so if I've got multiples ready to go, like 3 people, it would put 1 in each because there's 3 rooms. So I'm going to put this guy in room 1, and then I'm going to start my breakouts. Now the important thing to know is that when you click start breakouts the very first time you use this, it will copy whatever layout you have in place. So if I click start breakouts now, I get a message that says you're now in a breakout session, and you'll see that the room that I'm in, my breakout room, looks exactly like the room that I launched the breakouts from. So it copies that first room, which is something to remember. It's a bit confusing because really what it's saying is you need to prepare the breakout rooms in advance for how you want them to look. So I'm in the main area. The students are in their breakout rooms, which means that anything I'm saying on my microphone, they can't hear. I need to actually be in the same room as the students for them to hear me, unless I use this function up here, broadcast message. That allows me to send a message to everyone, like 2 minutes left in the activity, for example, and then they would all get that message. I'm going to split us into breakout rooms in a second so that you can see what it looks like. And potentially, I might put us all into the same breakout room so we can see what that's like. So I'm going to end breakouts in this room. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we all come back together into the same space. Alright, so we're all back into this same room again. And I'm now going to go across to my breakout area view and start the breakouts. We get a message, we're now in a breakout session, but people haven't been allocated yet, so I'm going to move you all into the first breakout room. Okay, hello group 1. We've come into our breakout room together, and a few things you might have noticed. One of them is you've all been promoted to presenter in this room, which means that you can use every pod in the room and do things with it if you like. You can type into those. You can turn your microphones on and use those because you're presenters. You can use your webcams if you want to because there's a webcam feature in this breakout room. But basically, that's the core principle of breakout rooms is there needs to be instructions of some sort, because what inevitably happens is that the breakout starts, people are in the same room together, and everyone asks the same question: what do we do now? So that basically suggests instructions before the breakout starts and potentially instructions in the room. In a notes pod, for example. So you might have instructions for group 1. Look, there are many ways that these sort of activities work and run. Obviously, having a clear idea of what you want the groups to achieve whilst they're talking with each other. If you're expecting them to produce something at the end of the breakout, like some kind of group summary, then that also suggests there's probably roles involved. So, are we potentially nominating a speaker back to the main group? Are we getting someone who's taking notes in the notes pod? Is there a series of questions or activities that need to be followed whilst the breakouts are going on? And at some point, the host for your meeting, or the moderator, you guys, will be coming into those breakout rooms probably just to check that people are on task, etc. So breakout rooms are far more about preparation, that the breakout rooms have everything they need in them. Maybe all you want is a chat pod for them to just have a chat about something. But more than likely, you're going to need some kind of instruction, maybe some prompts, or if there's documents you want them to have in their different breakout rooms, you've got to make sure that you've got to add in the right documents, the right links, etc., for them to be able to accomplish that. So I'm going to end the breakouts so that we all come back to the main room together. And I'd be interested to hear what that experience was like for you guys as participants, because it is, it's a very different experience, breakouts, particularly when it's not highly structured. So I'm happy to turn people's mics on if you wanted to put your hand up and talk about it. Otherwise, you can just put things into the chat pod. But I can tell you that of all the times I'm asked about using breakouts, there's usually a lot of eagerness about wanting to use them in rooms, and then let's say a smaller amount of eagerness afterwards once people realise what's involved preparation-wise, etc., for the activity. Yeah, good point, Karen. Good point. It's yeah, look, it's a powerful tool, but it almost takes me back to high school in a way, where I'm remembering times where we got split into groups and we just sort of sat around in a circle going, what do we do? What do they want us to do again? And there'd be maybe one or two people who were slightly extroverted, going, this is what we do, and they're organising people, and sometimes you were just in groups where no one really had an idea. Um, yeah, look, it's a really good question, Nicholas. The broadcast message box that's in the top right-hand corner, when you start breakouts, allows you to send a message to everyone, no matter which room they're in. It's text only. You can't have audio going out to everyone at once whilst the breakouts are going on. Um, and that box allows you either to end the breakouts or to send a message to everyone. So yeah, you're basically moving yourself between the different breakout rooms to make sure that people are on task and sticking to time and all those types of classroom management strategies. And then you'll probably end the breakout rooms and have some kind of powwow back together, where potentially people share their results. What I will show you, another feature of the breakouts, is that whatever content a person has put together in their breakout rooms, so let's say group 1 wrote some notes that is their summary that they then need to present back to the group, you as the host can then bring that same document into the main room with everyone else. This is going to be a bit tricky to show you because the breakouts were held in the same room and you're all participants. But I'll see how I go. If I go up to my pods menu, into an option that's called breakout pods, which is underneath all the other pods now because we ran breakout rooms, I can go into group 1 and take the notes that we just typed into, and I've just brought that back into the room with everyone else. So whatever they create together, the content they create together in their breakout rooms can absolutely be brought back into the main room to share with everyone else. That's just done through the pods menu. So it's quite powerful, and I'd probably suggest if you want to see me doing that, have a look at the recording afterwards. It is in your pods menu as a host. After you launch breakouts, there's an option that says breakouts, and then you go into the individual pods from the rooms and you can grab that content and share that back with the group. So yeah, it's powerful, but needs careful management basically. And I have been proven wrong on that before as well. I know people that use them freeform and just launch them, and people do their chatting, but more often than not, instructions are required for the users. Alright, so I'm going to hide that and move on. And I'm now going to talk about the presenter only area. So I'm going to share my screen again so we can go back to my pre-prepared room. Okay. So quite often you'll find in a room that's quite busy, or that you're going to have stages of your workshop where you've got content that you've prepared in advance but you need to bring in later on, we use a tool called the presenter only area, and it's available under the meeting menu where we've got this option, enable presenter only area. And you'll see when I open that, we'll talk about the engagement dashboard in a minute, it opens up this black panel, and this is kind of like my closet. Hosts or presenters can see this, and it means that I can create any type of pod or document in advance. So let's say, for example, I've got a really important PDF that I want to load in to bring in later. So I've created a share pod, another one. I've found my document. Let's call it a PowerPoint in this case. And I've loaded that PowerPoint into my share pod. It's now sitting in my closet ready to be used later on, but it's not visible to students. The students cannot see any of the presenter only area. It's got this little handlebar in the middle. The two arrows appear and I can resize that so it's not taking up too much real estate in my room. But when I'm ready to bring my content into the room, I can left click and drag that in, and it's now part of what the students can see. Right, so it's a way of pre-preparing content. Maybe you use something a lot and you're just leaving it in there and then dragging it in. That's the presenter only area. And I will do exactly that same thing back in our room so you can see what that appearing, not appearing looks like. So I'm going to turn on my presenter only area in our room here. and I happen to have a poll that I'd prepared before, and I've dragged it in from my presenter only area, and I now have that just added to the room. So again, it's about organization and strategy. If you've got lots of different types of content that you want to deal with during your session and you want to bring some of that in at a particular point, or maybe it's there at the beginning and you want to get rid of it, you don't have to hide it. You can just move it back into your presenter only area, your closet, if you will. And similarly, you can turn that option off so that you don't see your closet by going up to the meeting menu and hitting disable presenter only area, which I will do in my shared room. So it's still on at the moment. There's my presenter only area, and I go up to meeting and disable that, and it disappears. So some people like using the presenter only area as a strategy of having a whole bunch of documents, files, items, whatever ready to go to drag into the room. Other people create them on the fly. Others really, can you have multiple items queued up? Yeah, it's basically just an empty space, so you can have as many in there as you like. It's a good question. So it could be, it's sort of an infinite space. So I might have a share pod. I might have another chat pod for a particular purpose. I might have a Q&A pod for whatever reason, or a file link pod. You can just have as many as you want in there. The only problem becomes managing where they sit so that you can find them easily, because you're probably only going to want to have a little bit of this real estate visible so that it's not taking up your screen too much. So quite often it might be 2 or 3 things, and you might have 1, 2, and 3 ready to go, so that way when my room is ready for me to bring that in, I can go, yep, I'm ready for that one now. So yeah, it's very flexible. Probably don't have 20 things in there because they start sitting on top of one another and you can't see them properly anymore, but you can almost get rid of it entirely by dragging it right over to the right hand side near the layouts. So it's quite nifty for those that want to be sort of organized in advance in terms of content. So that's the presenter only area. Okay, I'm going to move on now to look at yeah, exactly. It's a really good point. If you're using a laptop screen, there's not a lot of real estate for you to move with. For people usually working from home using Connect sessions for a session at night, and they're on a laptop screen, for example, and they're trying to see all these things at once, things can get fairly squashed. So I'll just see if there's anything else in the chat pod. Got a lot of comments from people. Good stuff. Yeah, absolutely, Brett. A couple potentially to bring in at different points. Yep, and Nicholas made the point about laptops. Okay, great. So let's have a look at the engagement dashboard tool. This is a really interesting one. What I'm going to do for this, it only works really in the one screen, Brett. Yeah, it doesn't stretch across multiple screens. Good question though. I'm going to come back to our own room so that we can have a look at the meeting dashboard together. So I'll stop sharing. I'm going to turn on the presenter only area in our room together. And I'm going to make you all hosts, or at the very least presenters. So Brett, you're a presenter. Karen, presenter. Nicholas, presenter. Shani, presenter. And Sue. Okay, so you're all presenters in our room now together. You can see the presenter only area off on the right hand side. You can drag out those handlebars so that it's larger or smaller. I suggest you probably bring it out about halfway. It will keep your particular size. So even though you might have taken up 3/4 of the screen stretching it out, I can't see that. It only shows the size that I've made the presenter only area to me. So inside that area, you should all be able to see there's a poll in there. I'm going to hide that poll because it's not what we're talking about at the moment. And then up the top, there is a tool called the engagement dashboard. Can everyone just drop into the chat pod if they can see that? Okay, great. Yeah, right. So this is a tool that Adobe came up with in their Connect rooms, which takes a measure of people's activity every minute that the session is going on. And it's looking at things like, are you moving your mouse around? Is Adobe Connect the top of your windows being viewed, or is it, is the person on Facebook looking at other things? Has the person typed something in the chat pod? Are they clicking on other pods or options? It's got a very complicated equation, I'm sure, behind it, but the long and short of it is it comes up with a number between 1 and 100 about how engaged they are. It recalculates that every minute, and then it does an average, for example, of the number of people in the room to give you an engagement meter. And whether you think that's a gimmick or slightly valuable, that's completely at your discretion, obviously. But it is something they've put quite a lot of money into. The reason that I like the engagement dashboard is that underneath it gives you a summary of any of the interactivity in the room. So we had a couple of things. We had a poll about participants, and it gives me a summary of that poll underneath, and it tells me that 4 out of the 5 people in the room completed the poll, which is great. There was another poll that was in this room a second ago, and it tells me that there were 3 out of a potential 8 responses to that one. And so you're getting a visual summary of all the activity that you've provided for people to engage with. So it works particularly well with polls if you've got a lot of them. Q&A pods will also get a summary in there if there's a Q&A pod in the room. But it is a way of managing that enough people are doing the activities that you're putting to them. The other interesting thing about the engagement dashboard is that over on the left hand side in the attendees pod, which we've called Who's Here, can everyone see a colour next to their name? There's a little bar with a colour. Yeah, so just to the right of your name, you'll see a little green bar. I'm going to make this a bit bigger and see if that helps. You're all presenters, so you should be able to see it. Brett can't see it. Huh. Well, that's very strange. What if I make you a host, Brett? Let's see if that works. Can you see it now? Okay, that's really interesting. So some of the other presenters in the room could see it as presenters and others couldn't. So that's quite interesting. What that colour is your level of engagement from the engagement meter. So you're all green, which means you're close to 100% engaged apparently, based on what I'm doing at the moment. So you get this colour summary of what every participant in the room is, according to Adobe, engaged or not engaged. So Brett, you were talking about pressure before. You've now got a way of seeing the colour of what all the participants in the room are in terms of being engaged or not engaged. Yeah, it's a bit gimmicky, but it does make people giggle and sometimes even pay attention. Who knows? Students can't see it. In theory, presenters are meant to be able to see it. It's only visible if you look at the pod options for the attendee pod. Because we're all in the same room, you can't see that unless you click on the pod options. Next to Who's Here at the top of the attendees pod, come down to where the attendees pod here is on the left and click on the pod options in the top right hand corner of Who's Here. If you click on that menu, that's it. You'll see down the bottom of that list an option that says Show Individual Engagement. And that's how you turn those colours on and off. Right, so it's connected to the engagement dashboard. Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, the idea that if you don't have the Adobe Connect window in front, you're instantly classified as not engaged. It does have a cooldown timer on it. You don't go from 100 to 0 in 1 minute. I think you go down in 20% increments each minute. So you've all just dropped down to 89%. So I'm obviously doing something terribly wrong. It'll use that same spectrum from the engagement dashboard. So it'll go from bright green down to red on the right hand side. So anyhow, whether that's you think that's gimmicky or valuable or just interesting, the tool is there for you to use. That's a really good question, Brett. The first thing that you need to do, the engagement dashboard is only ever visible to you in the presenter only area. So you do need to have your presenter only area turned on up in the meeting menu. Enable presenter only area and you'll be able to see it. It's also visible up in the pods menu. If you all want to go up to the pods menu up the top, I'll make Karen and Sue hosts as well. If you look in the pods menu, you'll see down the bottom there's engagement dashboard. It's got a tick next to it at the moment. Right, that's how you make sure that the engagement dashboard is visible, and that color reflection of individual engagement is accessible through the pod menu. The attendees pod options in the top right hand corner of the attendees pod, as we just saw. Right, so that's the Adobe's engagement measurement tools that are in this space, and I do suggest you have a little bit of a play just to see if it's giving you information that's valuable during your sessions or not, but definitely have a play. All right, moving right along, I'm aware of time running away from us. We're almost out, so I want to show you a couple of things. One of them is there is a website where Adobe has extra applications and extensions for your Adobe Connect rooms. I'm going to click on that link, Adobe Connect Extensions and Apps, as a host, and select Browse To. And in theory, that's now opened that room up for all of you, so you can see in your web browsers Adobe's extension page. Each of these extensions works the same way. You basically download it and then you would load that file into a share pod. So you'd share document, find the file that you've downloaded, and then it would give you one of these functions. I'm going to show you just one of them. The rest are for you to basically play with and have a look at. I'll just turn off my presenter only area. So I've got a pod that I downloaded from that page in the past. It's called the doorbell. If I can find it. Share. Hang on. This is going to give me some hassles. Share, document, and upload. Okay, so this one's called the doorbell. And the doorbell does amazing things, like rings a doorbell. This one is used basically for people to let you know when students have entered the room. So it can be turned on so that every attendee that comes into your Adobe Connect room, you'll get a ring of the bell. And usually this is used for people that want to have drop-in sessions and they haven't been notified. It is annoying, Shani, but it's kind of valuable if you don't want to be staring at your Adobe Connect room whilst you're waiting for someone to turn up. So I can now minimize this room and go and work on something else, whatever, other web pages, as long as I can hear the computer, and then the student turns up for our meeting, etc., and the doorbell rings. So it's somewhat valuable for that drop-in exercise. You'll see there's some options down the bottom. Do you want it to play for everybody? So maybe that's annoying, as you said, you could turn that off. Or is it just going to play when people come into the room? That's just an example of one of the extensions that are in that room. It's a free one. And people that want to use their Connect rooms for consultations or drop-ins generally get some value out of using the doorbell extension. So if you decide to get any of those applications and extensions from that room, they'll generally be SWF files. Download it to your computer and then load it into a SharePod. So that's the doorbell. Now if I have a look at other things that I haven't covered yet in our session, auto promote. This is the last one we'll dwell on today, and then I'll let you go. We quite often get requests now for students to have access to Adobe Connect rooms to use themselves, either in groups or as a cohort, without needing the host to be in there. This is usually either project-based or part of their kind of study groups, or there's a whole lot of different potential uses for that. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see the other room again. I'll hide some of these things. So the point is, I want a room that the students can use and come to without me being there. The way that we make one of those work, apart from having the room created, is we go up to Meeting, and under Manage Access and Entry, the last option is Auto Promote. So if I auto promote the participants to presenters, it means they're not going to need a host to be present for the room to stay active. So you may or may not be aware that Adobe Connect rooms by default need a host in the room, otherwise they'll kick people out after 15 minutes. It's just a timer that's on. Need a host, no host, you get booted after 15 minutes. Unless you have this access and entry function turned on, where we promote the people in there to presenters. I get this little eye icon in the top right hand corner, and that tells me that auto promote is on, and I can turn it off again by clicking that button. But it will allow that room to be used for whatever purpose without a host present. So it may be valuable for your particular use or not, but it is a popular one. Right, so look, we've covered a whole bunch of different tools and things this time around. I'm happy to hang around for another 10 minutes or so and take questions and chat to people, but otherwise, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you at the next session. Shani, good question. You go up to the meeting menu in your room, and then you go to Manage Access and Entry, and then turn on Auto Promote Participants. Yeah, my pleasure. Don't forget you can watch the recording when I send the link out to all of you. And happy Thursday.